Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Doyle. I'm an independent developer based in Sydney, Australia. I've been working with SAP for 20 years now, and welcome to this session, Getting Started with SAP Cloud Platform Workflow. My aim is to show you what the workflow service has to offer and to encourage you to try it out yourselves. So this is the plan for the session. So first of all, we'll talk about why you should use the Cloud Platform Workflow service rather. Then we'll talk about some of the basic building blocks, how you get started building a workflow. So we'll talk about tasks, and then we'll talk about gateways. Don't worry about those for the moment. I'll explain what it all means. Then we'll go for a demo. And then finally, we'll go through some tips, some things that might save you a bit of time when you start developing your own workflows. Okay, so let's get started. So first of all, why use the Cloud Platform Workflow service? Does anybody have any idea why I've chosen this picture on the slide of this gentleman? Um, If you have any idea, then you can say on the chat why you think we've chosen him. Hey, Phil. Hey, Amit. We've chosen that image on the slide because we use a cloud platform workflow service to orchestrate services. So it's like the conductor of an orchestra. So you can imagine that all your different systems are like the different instruments in an orchestra. And the workflow service is like the conductor. It can orchestrate those different a process across those different systems. So if, for example, your company, I'm thinking about an end user company here, if you have maybe some documentation or something that says, oh, for Z1 orders, don't forget to do thing A in system X, then you could make things much more robust if you actually have a workflow to take care of those things and you don't have a business process that relies around people remembering to do things. So that orchestration is a really good reason to use the workflow service. Next, we have asynchronous because the workflow service is great for asynchronous processes. One of my customers who went live last year with S/4HANA Cloud, they had a requirement whereby there was an approval process. And then once the request was approved, we had to create potentially dozens of customers and dozens of commercial projects. And we didn't want to have the user to have to wait for all of that to happen. And the good news is they don't have to because we had the workflow service. So what we can do is we can just register the decision that that user's made, say approving, and then we can go ahead and create all those master data objects, and they don't need to wait because we can do it. We can do it in the background. Next, we have cross-system because the workflow service obviously can interact with lots of different systems. So business workflow, what we SAP developers used to just call workflow, that still exists and it's still being developed. It's still being used and they're still writing new workflows. That makes most sense to use when we're dealing within one single system. So for example, all the action is happening within S4. But if your processes cover multiple systems, then the workflow service is great because you can, it doesn't make sense to run your workflow in any one of those systems necessarily. You can have it up in the cloud and then it can interact with all those different systems. It's a much better architecture. And it's also great for SaaS products like S/4HANA Cloud, for example, where you can't develop your own workflows from scratch like you would in an on-premise system. So that means it's great for us. We can just be working up on Cloud Platform, and we can build things however we want. So that's great. So finally, we have skills and tools. So is anybody in the session ever written some JavaScript? Just give me a +1 in the chat if you've ever written some JavaScript. Anybody? Let's see. Come on, Phil, you've written some JavaScript. So anybody who has written JavaScript, you've got a head start with script tasks. I'll explain what all the different tasks are next, but if you've got those JavaScript skills, they'll come in handy. Who's ever called a RESTful service like an OData service or written an OData service? Anybody? You've got a head start with service tasks because they service tasks use those skills. Okay, good. You're getting a few +1s now. That's good. Thank you. All right. So who's written UI5? Anybody? Yes, excellent. Okay.
You should just add for there is like a 30-second delay, so just so you're aware.
Oh, on the chat. Okay,
yes.
Great. So anybody's written UI5, then you've got a head start with building the UI for user tasks, what we show the user. So that's great. And anybody use Web IDE? If you have, you've got a head start with modeling workflows. And even Business Application Studio, the workflow model is now available in Business Application Studio. Okay, that's great. Yep, got lots of +1s there. Fantastic. So in short, a really good reason to use the workflow service is that it uses the skills we already have and the tools we already use. So I think they're really smart in that sense. They knew the audience that they were hoping would use the service, the developers that would use it. So they've used all those skills that we already use elsewhere. So that's fantastic. Fantastic aspect to it. All right, so let's have a look at the building blocks of the workflow now. I've mentioned some of them so far. So first we'll talk about tasks and we'll talk about user tasks. So user tasks handle interaction with users, as you might imagine, and it can be a simple decision, like that old chestnut approve reject. That's a classic. You make a decision, approve or reject, but it could be a little bit more than that. So we could be taking some kind of input from the user, like they could be entering a comment, or they could also be choosing something like choosing a product. So maybe you're a new starter and you need to choose your new laptop. What brand of laptop do you prefer, or do you want Windows or Mac, for example? So this is something we do with a user task. The subject, which is that first highlighted field you can see there, that's what they actually see in my inbox. And then the second field I've highlighted there is a user field. So that's actually who's going to receive the work item basically in their inbox. So it could be a single user or multiple users, or you could have actually a group as well. So it would go to a number of people in a particular team, for example. Now, a couple of things to bear in mind is in this example, you actually have a hard-coded user, but you can have it so that it's mapped to what's called a context variable. So that can change according to the logic, and so it won't always go to the same person. You could have, two different divisions, and if it's in division A, it goes to that manager, and if it's in division B, it goes to that manager, for example. And it's also important to note that this is actually a user ID. In this case, I've my example set up so the email address is the actual ID of the user, but it's definitely a user ID that goes here, not a email address. So it could be M Doyle, for example, or P1234, or whatever. So in this next example, we do actually have a context variable here. So this means it's not hard coded now, and we can use some logic to determine who it goes to. So you might say, what's this context thing? Tell us about that, Mike. Well, here's an example of the context. It's basically the persistence for the workflow instance. So it's the way where we store the data as the workflow runs through. So there's one context for the whole workflow for all of the tasks from beginning to end. And as we go, the various different tasks will often update the context and read values from there. As you can see, it's just a JSON object. It's very straightforward. And you can see that you can set initial value. If you look on the picture on the left, you can see there's a sample context there. So if we we create an instance of our workflow in test mode, we can put in this context to start us off, basically. Instead of the workflow being launched in the normal way and a context being set, we can just sort of store a test value, and that's what you can see here. So in this example, you can see we're ordering a phone, say, again, maybe for a new starter. And you can see the context is storing the model of phone, the price, and the approval status. And the last part of the user tasks we need to consider are the user interface. And there's two types of user interface that you can use. The simplest to set up is what I'm showing here, which is a workflow form. And that's what we use in the demo. And in the workflow form, we just list a number of actions, which is what the user can do. Again, we've got approve, reject here, a very common example. And we also can list a number of fields from the context to show on the screen. So this is what the user sees when they're making that approve, reject decision in this example. And the fields can be editable as well. More power comes from using a UI5 component. And this is what I would do. I like developing UI5. And you can list a component that you've deployed to Cloud Platform. And the component, obviously you need UI5 skills then to build that, which the advantage of the workflow form is you don't need a UI5 developer. And the component uses what's called the task consumption model, or the TCM. And that's basically an API that my inbox provides. So your component can use that API to read the data of the work item, the task that it's actually representing, can read the values in the context, and also it can use it to add the buttons in, so the user can see those. And ultimately, when the user makes their decision, the component calls a TCM to say this was what the decision was, and it can update the context with the appropriate values. So for user tasks, we can do that workflow form, or we can do the UI5 component. Okay, so next up, we've got another type of task called a service task. And this could be calling a system. It's basically an API call. So it could be calling a system like S4HANA, for example, or Gateway Hub, or SuccessFactors, or anything else, a non-SAP system, of course, also. In fact, we can call any RESTful service that returns JSON content. It doesn't have to be an OData service. So in this example on the right-hand side, you can see where we've mapped out our API call. If you're doing a get, you can just put the parameters in the path. But for a post, obviously, you need to have some kind of payload. So, for example, you're creating a phone order here in this example. So if you're creating something, you need to have a payload that you're passing into the service, like the model of phone, for example, and the order quantity. So for that, you need to be able to have this request variable that you can see in the example. So that is in the context. And just before you call the service task, you need to have that context variable available. So and you need to populate the data. So the question is, how would you do that? Well, you would use a script task, which is basically just some JavaScript, which runs, and it can read context values and write them. So that's how, as the workflow goes, we update the context. And you often have this pattern where you alternate between, say, a service task, you make an API call, and then you have a script task or two to interpret the values from your API call, what comes back, and also to update the context may be ready for the next API call, the next service task you're going to make. So you can see this script task in this example is very, very simple. We're just saying if the price is over $500, then it has to go to the CEO. Otherwise, it just goes to the manager for approval. So that could be setting the user that could be mapped to the user in an upcoming user task. So we're determining who's going to get the approval item. Okay, we're near the end now of going through these basic building blocks of the workflow. All that remains is to talk about gateways. And there are two types of gateways. The first one is the exclusive gateway. And in this case, we have some branching. Gateways are all about branching. And the key word is or. So what happens is we take one branch or the other branch. That's an exclusive gateway, hence the name and hence the X symbol. So in this case, if approval is required, we go down the bottom path. But if approval isn't required, then we go along the top. And the important thing with exclusive gateways is we need to maintain these flows so that the workflow knows which way it's supposed to go. So one of the flows has to have a condition attached to it. So in this case, we've said if the approval status is required, then we want to follow this branch, the one that the arrow is coming off here. And on the other flow, we just put a default flag. So what that means is that in all other cases, it goes along that default path. So in this case, we've only got two. Actually, you could have more than two paths. But there has to always be one default one so that the workflow doesn't ever end up with nowhere to go. So there always has to be a default flow that it can go along if none of the others are true. All right, and the second type of gateway, this is the last slide in the introduction part. The second type of gateway is a parallel gateway. So now the key word here is and, because we always take both branches, hence a plus symbol you can see here in the actual gateway. Now the tasks are done logically in parallel, but they won't actually happen at the same time necessarily because there's basically only one thread. So that's something to bear in mind. And here we don't need to maintain any conditions on the flow because we're always going to go down both branches. All right, so now we're going to jump into the demo. Maybe does anybody have any questions on any of that content before I dive into the demo? Okay, cool. I think we'll go on to the demo. All right, so now we've learned the basics, we can move on to our first assignment as a team. We're going to build the simplest possible workflow that uses all of the building blocks we've covered, the very simplest one possible. Now, this is our customer here, Workflow Demo Incorporated. You may have heard of them, possibly. And this is Chaz. He's the social media manager. And he's going to write the corporate tweets. Oh, we do have a question. Does ECC is Cloud Platform Workflow replacing ECC Workflow, which I referred to earlier as Business Workflow? So the answer to that is no. Basically, they're complementary. So Business Workflow is still being developed and it's still being used. They're still writing new workflows in S4. But Cloud Platform Workflow is complementary, basically, and the two will probably coexist for a long time. Okay, so back to Chaz. So in the past, he's posted some unprofessional tweets, let's say, So Katie, who's the marketing director, she wants to approve each tweet before it actually goes live, and only if she approves should it be posted to Twitter. So our job is to build a workflow to do that. Unfortunately, we had a developer, but they've gone and left it half done. They got a better offer, higher pay, so they've left us in the lurch. So we're going to have to finish off the workflow. So before we start, does anybody have Twitter on their phone? Or if not, just open a new tab in your browser and go find the account, and so we can test whether our workflow actually posts Chaz's tweet. So the handle you have to look for is @demo_workflow. So go find that. It's a real account. Get out your phone or open a new tab in your browser. Go to Twitter and maybe just give me a +1 in the chat when you've found the account. So it's @demo_workflow.
I think we have a question in the meantime, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Does the ECC workflow replace Cloud Workflow?
Yeah, I think I answered that. The two are complementary, basically.
Oh, I apologize. I
Yeah,
just zoned out for a second.
yeah. So business workflow still exists, but it's focused on building workflows within one system,
Right.
like ECC or S4, for example. Okay, Phil's got it on got the Twitter account. That's great. All right. In the meantime, I'll go to Web IDE. Okay, here we go. So hopefully everyone's found the Twitter account. We'll need that in a minute, and I'll show you actually what it looks like. Here we go. So here's the account. Should look like this when you find it. And you can see that the last tweet was actually from 2019. This is maybe one of the ones that made Katie think she needed to, have more control over what Chaz was putting out. Okay, a few +1s I can see. That's awesome. That's great. All right, so I need a bit of help here in working out what I need to do in my workflow. So the first thing we need to do, you can see, kind of get a sense of what our existing developer did. There's some kind of logic here. It goes, if approved, no, then it's sending a mail, I think, there saying that it's been rejected. But if it is approved, then there's some kind of script task to add a hashtag. That must be just the company hashtag to add on the end. And then there's something happens and then the workflow finishes. So I think the first thing we need to do is we need to have an inbox item for Katie so she can see what Chaz has written and she can give her decision, approve or reject. So does anybody have any idea what kind of task we should add to give Katie that inbox item? If you say in the chat if you know what kind of task we should have. I think Phil might know. I'll give you a bit of a clue. Here are some of the things we have in the palette. Anybody know which one I should pick? Yep, that's right. We'll go for a user task. So here we go. We'll pop that in here. There we go. Very good, Rakesh. And Naresh Babu. That's fantastic. Thank you. All right. So I think that's right. We want to use a task. So what we're going to do is we'll just flesh this out. So this first name here, this is just for what we see in the modeler. So we'll just call this task approve tweet. This isn't something that anybody actually sees, any real end users. But if we go to the next tab, we see the subject that they are actually going to see. And we're going to make this approve tweet as well, so that they know what kind of inbox item it is, basically. And we need to set the recipient. So what we're going to do is we're going to set this for Katie. So we put in a user ID, which, as I said earlier, is actually her email address as well. So don't get too hung up on that. This is actually a user ID. It could be KTT or some other kind of user ID. And so that's all good. So now we need to say what kind of UI that is going to be there, because we need to show her something, give her something to interact with. So we can choose a workflow form in this case. I tried to keep it simple, even though I love developing UI5. We'll use a workflow form here, and I'm just going to select an existing form that I prepared earlier. Or I should say that our developer left behind. He must have developed that part. Okay. So that should be everything there. I'm just going to save that. And then what we do is we need to connect it up. Here's where our workflow starts. So we can take a flow from the palette over here, and we can connect it up to our user task. And apart from choosing things on the palette on the left-hand side here, you can also use these speed buttons. So if you just select a widget, then we can just drag. There we go. All right, so now we've got a user task connected up. That's all good work. And we can just check what happens here. So we have an exclusive gateway here. You remember from the slides, and you can see that we have the default path is down here, but we have a condition on this flow. So we basically say if the last decision is approved, then we go along here on the approval path. If it's not, then in any other case, we'll just go down here and we'll send an email to Chaz saying, bad luck, Katie didn't approve her email. And we just need to check that this flow, we have this user task 2. We just check that this matches the ID of that task up there. Okay, great. So there's 2 more things we need to do. We need to actually post the tweet to Twitter if it's approved. And we need to send Chaz an email to let him know the good news that it got approved. So does anybody know what kind of task we're going to use to actually post to Twitter? Let me know on the chat if you know what kind of task we should add to do that API call. I'll give you a clue again. These are the tasks that I've got to choose from. Anybody know which one? API call? Okay, it's a service task. So that's what we need. We can go and put this over here. Yeah, well done, Phil. Thank you. Rakesh. All right, so again, we give the service task a name. So we're going to call it post tweet because that's what it does. Again, this is just for the developers. Nobody's ever going to actually see this. There are no human beings involved with this service task. So we need to set a destination, and mine is just called Twitter, and the path is just called statuses. So this is Twitter they don't call it a tweet, they call it a status update. So statuses is the name of the path. And we need to set a variable so it can find the payload we want for the request. So we're going to set this a particular syntax for setting a context variable. So I'll just put that in here, and the variable is called new tweet. Here we go. Oh, Rakesh has got both. He's got the next one as well. The next one's an email task. That's right. Good work, Rakesh. Right. So we've got the request variable in there. That's all that we need to do, actually. If we wanted to look at the response, we could put another variable here, and we'd retrieve the response there. Okay, so that should be everything we need for our API task, service task. Let's just check that one last time. All right, so now we can connect this up as well. See, it's a lot of fun putting these together. Okay, and as Rakesh said, we need a mail task to send the email to Chaz to let him know the good news. So we're going to call this one inform author approved. And then to fill in the details. So now we are actually putting in an email address. We're not putting any user ID. But obviously in my example, the two are the same, but that's not confusing. All right. So we don't need any CC or any BCC. We do need a subject though for the email. So we'll just make that tweet approved. And the final thing we need is we actually need to put some text in the email. So we'll just we'll have this text at the top, your tweet was approved, but then we'll put the actual value that was chosen. So Chaz knows which of his tweets actually got approved and went to Twitter. So we should be all good with that. So now we can connect up this task as well. So you can see this is a these branches are running in parallel. Basically, we're going to do both of these things. The parallel gateways with the plus signs. All right, so I think that all looks good. I'll just save. And then we should be able to deploy our workflow. It looks like it's all finished now. All right, now what you might think that what we do is we just come up here on our project, we right click, and we get a nice deploy in the menu, maybe deploy to SAP Cloud Platform. But that won't actually deploy our workflow. It will deploy any artifacts like HTML5 apps, for example, in the project, but it won't deploy our workflow. So we need to go down here and actually deploy the workflow itself. We right click, we choose deploy and deploy to SAP Cloud Platform Workflow. And you can see that we get this little pop over here telling us it's been deployed. That's all we need to do. I can see Rakesh is asking, I hope we can use the context into and subject and other fields. And the answer is yes, you can use context variables basically everywhere, as long as you use that that syntax I showed you, then you can use context variables in all the fields basically. It's actually going to be quite rare in practice that you hard code fields like that it always goes to the same user or something like that. Okay, so our workflow is deployed. So let's have a go and see if it works. So first of all, we need to go and actually have Chaz post a tweet. So what I need is some inspiration. So what should I put in the tweet that we're going to send that Chaz is going to post to Twitter? Somebody give me something, a place I should mention, or something about SAP online track or something like that. So what should I put in the tweet? I'll give you a chance to think of something and put it in the chat, and then we'll send that off in the tweet. You can see here that we logged on as Chaz now, and we have this very fancy advanced UI5 app for him to enter his tweet. So I just need some inspiration. What shall I put in there? Something about SAP Online Track, maybe? Does anyone have any suggestions? Need to wait because there's a bit of a lag on the chat. Here we go. Thank you, Rakesh. Thank you. All right, SAP Workflow is great. Good suggestion. The workflow is great. And Phil says SAP Online Track has been amazeballs. Okay. And SAP Online Track has been amazeballs. Thank you very much. Okay. And I'll put in Naresh has suggested something as well. I think we've got enough there. There we go. Let's hope that doesn't somehow cause me problems. I'm sure it'll be fine. All right. So Chaz is going to post that now. Here we go. And it's been posted. Okay, so the tweet is gone. So if everyone have a look at Twitter, let's see if we see that message there. Okay, let's have a look. No, still 2019 is the last one. Nothing there. Why isn't it there? What's happened? Why do I not see the tweet? Anyone got any ideas? Of course, it hasn't been approved yet. So it hasn't gone to Twitter because it hasn't been approved yet. So let's have a look. Now we're logged on as Katie. So we can see, yeah, thank you, Rakesh. Approval was the missing part. So now we have this inbox item here, and this is the workflow form. You can see we specified to show the text, and we also had the approve reject buttons. You can see those down here. So clearly the @ symbol hasn't broken our logic. We'll see if the Twitter API is all right with it. I'm sure it will be. It was a sad day if you couldn't use an @ in the Twitter API. So if Katie goes ahead and approves that now, that seems fine. Nothing inappropriate. So we'll hit approve. Okay, and that's it. Our inbox item is gone. Our work is done. So now everybody look at Twitter. Have a look on your phone. Refresh the tab you opened on your browser. Let's see if it's there. Can anybody see it there? Let me know. Bit of suspense. Anybody got a drum roll? Can anybody see it? Have a look.
I can do drum roll.
Thank you very much, Pia.
No problem.
Let's have a look. Is it there? Yes, there we go. SAP Workflow is great, and SAP Online Track has been amazeballs at 2020. Oh, it's a real account. There we go. Cool. All right. So there's one more thing to check. Did Chaz get an email? Let's see. Did Chaz get an email? Not yet. Let's give that a little refresh. Sometimes Outlook's a bit slow. No, still no email. I don't think. Let's have a look. Maybe we did something wrong. Maybe there's something wrong with Outlook. That seems much more likely to.
Yes, I was just going to pitch that. Outlook might be have a bit of a delay there too.
Yeah, usually I do something like mistype the email address.
Well, we all know it. I've sent you an email like 10 seconds ago and I'm still waiting for it.
Let's have a look. If not, we'll have to do a bit of debugging. We've got enough time at the moment, so let's have a look. That is very interesting. Sometimes if I send help, I think it's either an Outlook thing or a SES thing. Let's have a look. Let's post one more. Okay. So I'll post that. We'll go along and do the approval. Maybe the app made the email go wrong somehow. Shouldn't do. Okay, so we approve that. At least you all know that it's actually live. Look. Come on, have a look. Oh, not there. we can check. We can check in flow. We'll see what's going on. Let's see if we can discern what the problem is. So if we have a look at the workflow instances, so this is a standard app that's provided. So we need to change the status because by default it won't show the completed. It's only showing the error, the ones that are running now are in error. So let's have a look, see the completed one. And so this shows us all the header information. You can see this is the one I just started. If we have a look at the context, you can see the body that I wrote here, come on Outlook, and it's added the hashtag. So everything looks okay here. So I think the email probably gone, and I'm going to pin the blame on Microsoft. So you can see we go bottom to top. So Chaz started the workflow, then the user task got created. Katie completed the task. We appended the hashtag. And it seems this completed successfully. And then we finished. It should be there. It's not. Well, there you go, live demo. You can see a previous one. This is what it should have looked like. There we go. All right, so what we'll do is we'll go back to the slides and then we'll maybe just come back in a bit and see if it eventually turns up, if Microsoft can pull their finger out. Anybody listening from Microsoft? Anybody work for Microsoft? All right. Yeah, it's definitely, Rakesh is saying, is it the right mailbox? It's definitely the right mailbox, because this is Chaz. So it's definitely the right one. I think it's just taking a while to, maybe if we look at the slides and then we come back, it might be there. Anyway, at least the tweet went to Twitter. So let's just go on with a couple of, just got a couple more slides. And about the tips. So the first one is about the layout. So one of the really cool things about the workflow service is that it allows you to arrange the widgets on the screen basically however you like, and it doesn't try to change the layout. So as you arrange the different tasks and the flows yourself, it leaves them there. It takes note of where they are, and when you open up the workflow again, it's all exactly where you left it. And often what you need is some kind of looping logic. So there's a couple of different scenarios in which you do that quite frequently. The first is approval, where sometimes you need to go through several approval levels before the final approval happens. You need to go up the hierarchy until you get someone senior enough. So that's one kind of loop scenario. Another one is if you need to create multiple objects, like my example before, where we might need to create 99 customers in S4 HANA. So then we need to have some kind of loop logic where we go through the service task multiple times until we've created all of our customers. So what my tip is basically to embrace that and arrange your widgets on the screen in such a way that you can see the loop clearly. Don't just have all of your task in a big long line and then have an enormous flow to go back to the beginning. Try and get the circle going, and then that means you can fit a lot more of your workflow on the screen when you look at it in Web IDE. So if you look at this example, this is a real world example. I've deliberately made it really small, so because this is for a customer and I don't want to give anything away, but you can just see this is a more complex workflow, but you can see the loop going on around the outside of the sort of right hand side there. That's an approval flow going round and round. So embrace that loop and arrange the objects in that kind of way. It works really well. Another thing is renaming. So once you've created your workflow, you might find in the admin apps that you don't like the name that appears there. And the way to update that is to go and select your workflow, like you can see on the left-hand side here with the tick. Update your workflow, select your workflow rather, and then just change the value in the subject box. So you're not selecting an individual task, it's actually the whole workflow that you've got selected. Don't do what you can see on the right-hand side, which is use the regular Web IDE rename, which is there, and you can rename the artifact, as it were. But what will happen is that it will cause all kinds of problems because the other artifacts like email templates and script files and so on are all named. There's this naming convention. Their folder is the same as the name of the workflow. So if you just go and rename the workflow in here, suddenly it will lose all of its other artifacts. So the way to rename is to do what's on the left and just select the workflow. And finally, if you are developing UI5 components for the user task, which if you're doing anything reasonably complex, you'll need to do once you go beyond the workflow form. It's a lot simpler if you put all of the data that component needs in the context. So it can read the context using that TCM API, which I talked about earlier, the task consumption model. So you want to be able to just get all of the data that you need to display from the context. Now you can have your component call another OData service, but it adds a lot of complexity. That it's documented here on this page, you can see, but it's much easier if you just put everything in the context and then just read it using the TCM. It makes your life a lot simpler. So when you're designing your app, bear that in mind. And finally, I haven't put a lot of references and recommendations and so on the slides because I have a blog which you can get to here, tiny.cc/wfblog. And I've got a load of references and things in here as well as a general introduction to the workflow services. And for example, DJ had wrote a very good blog series a while ago, so I've got links to that and everything in here. So if you want some more information about workflow, just check out the blog, and all the links and references and everything are in there. Okay, so actually, before we go questions, let's just have another look. No, still not there. Never mind. Never mind. I should have sacrificed a goat or something to the demo gods, as Bill suggests. So, does anybody have any questions? I have to give it a minute, I know, because there's a bit of a lag here. I think there was one earlier. I think I answered all the other ones that appeared so far. Oh, somebody was saying, I don't believe it's on trial accounts. But it is. I'm using it on a trial account here, and the Cloud Foundry trial account also has workflow available now as well. Okay, anybody got any questions? Okay, thank you, Naresh. You're very welcome. Okay, anybody got any other questions? Must have answered them already. Thank you, Rakesh. You're very welcome.
Well,
Wait.
in the meantime, maybe we could draw a winner from the raffle.
Sure.
Great. So I'll just share my screen.
Yeah.
And
Ah,
let's see here.
Pia, they have. Can we? When you finish, the emails have arrived.
All right. All right. I'll just
Maybe-
take out the demo. So 1 second. Mike, can you see my screen with the spinning wheel?
I'll hold on a sec because I've just popped out the chat. I didn't want to watch myself.
Sure.
So I just had the chat. I just need to. Oh yeah, yeah. I can see. No, I can still see my screen in the email, I think.
All right. Let's see.
So I think everyone saw the emails anyway. We can.
Right. Okay. I'll just spin the wheel, and we hope it works. Oh, it's one of those words I'm gonna have pretty hard time reading from, but it's Himayatullah. I'll just pop it into the. There we go. All right, you can claim the screen back if you like.
Okay. I don't know how to do that, but I think I don't have anything else to show. I think it's great. I think we should just wrap up there.
Okay. I think
I
if you
think
just click
everyone
your
saw the emails. The
yeah.
email did finally arrive. I'm blaming Microsoft for that. Maybe I should pay for an email service to demo with. And thanks everybody for attending. That was really cool. And I'll see you maybe in the unconference channel. Thank you very much,
Yes.
Pia.
No problem. My pleasure. I think we can claim the unconference number 1. So people can meet up there through the Discord if anybody needs the link for the Discord.
Number 1, not number 2.
Oh, sure. We can do number 2. Let's go
Yeah,
number
because
2.
I think we were number 2 channel.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So thank you so much, everyone.